try not to bite. No, I've definitely bitten off. Okay, Joe's promised sweets. Fantastic. Well, thank you all for coming down here. Welcome to the Agricology tent. Agricology is all about farmers and researchers sharing knowledge and experience on agroecological in the field and online. So building on some of the discussions that have been happening across the site today, which has been so exciting. I don't know about you guys, but I just absolutely love this event. Just so much passion and so many ideas. We're building on that, looking at trees on farms. So you guys were this morning on a session on silver alba and silver oak pasture. It's an opportunity, really. I'm gonna do some quizzing, and then we'll open up to you guys for some questions as well. So I'll quickly introduce myself. Katie Bliss from Agricology, also work with the Organic Research Centre, and I'll pass you over to these guys to do a quick introduction to themselves too.
Hi everyone, my name's Jo Smith and I actually work with Katie at the Organic Research Centre. Although I have to say we don't often see her there, she's out most of the time doing things like this, which is great. Not great that we don't see you, sorry. So I work on agroforestry research at ORC. I've been there for about 10 years now, investigating various elements of silver arable and silver oak pastoral systems in terms of their performance, their effect on the environment, and so on. Pass over to you, Helen.
Hi, I'm Helen Cheshire and I work for the Woodland Trust. I sort of coordinate, lead our work with trees on farms. I actually come from a farm. I grew up on a dairy and sheep farm in the Midlands, so I probably know a bit more about farming than I do trees, even though I've worked for the Woodland Trust for about 20 years. The Woodland Trust is very passionate about agroforestry because it helps us to meet our vision of creating a more resilient tree landscape, and we strongly believe that trees have a really good role on farms in terms of supporting productive, sustainable agriculture while delivering a whole array of environmental benefits.
Brilliant, thank you. So before we get started, I'm interested in what you guys are up to. How many of you out there have got an agroforestry system? How many of you are thinking about it? Oh, got one there. Brilliant, great. Well, hopefully we can help you with thinking about that, thinking about design, thinking about what your options are. To kick us off, Jo, can you tell us a bit about the work at the Organic Research Centre at Wakelands and Elm Farm, what the agroforestry trials there, what you've got there and what you've been learning?
You want me to
Big
summarise
question. Yeah, if you could just summarise 10 years of research in about 5 minutes, that'd be great.
Well, it's hard to know where to start, so let's start at Wakelands Agroforestry. Who here has heard of Wakelands? It's over in the east, so over in Suffolk. So it's 22.5 hectares. It was set up by Professor Martin Wolf, who sadly died earlier this year, a big loss there. He set it up 25 years ago, and it's a really diverse agroforestry silver arable system. And it just briefly, it's an alley cropping system. There's 3 kind of main agroforestry systems, 2 with short rotation coppice. So one is with hazel and the other is with willow. That's coppiced on regular rotations to feed into the wood chip boiler that heats the farmhouse, with an organic arable rotation that goes around the alleys. The alleys are about 10 to 12 metres wide, so it's quite narrow alleys for a silver arable system. The other system is a really diverse timber and apple tree system, again on that kind of spacing of 10 to 12 metres wide. Over the years we've done all sorts of research there, looking at productivity of the short rotation coppice, the growth of the trees, and I suppose, in line with kind of Martin's reason for doing it, diversity is at the core, and really that diversity was aimed to have a function. So kind of picking up on maybe 3 areas that we looked at. One is looking at how diversity can really impact or reduce diseases. So we looked at apple trees, apple production in this mixed timber and apple system. And the nice thing there, so you've got 7 different timber species. You've got, I think there was about 25 different apple varieties, and it was all mixed in together. And we were looking at the incidence of scab in these apples, in the apple production, and comparing it with an organic kind of intensive orchard. It's organic, but it's much more intense. And just because you've got these different varieties that are mixed in, so separated spatially, there is actually much lower incidence of scab in the apples compared to this orchard. So it kind of makes sense. You're not seeing that spread of disease across the trees because they're actually spatially separated. Also, because it's alley cropping, there's greater distance between the trees, allowing better ventilation, winds coming through and drying the apples. So kind of getting away from the damp conditions that scab needs. On the flip side of that, it's much more kind of knowledge intensive in terms of knowing when to harvest these different varieties, and you've only got a few of each. So some creativity in terms of marketing is also needed to back that up. Related to that it wasn't with research, but it was an observation that Martin picked up, where we've got these alley crops of short rotation coppice, and he had potatoes growing in the alleys, and the short rotation coppice was really acting as barriers to slow down the spread of blight across the alleys as well, so kind of more of a mechanistic impact. And then just kind of moving on from there, the value of the trees for kind of promoting functional biodiversity has been looked at by various students over time, including a PhD student from Reading, and she compared pollinators, so bumblebees, solitary bees, and I think hoverflies in this short rotation coppice system with crops compared to a organic arable system, and found huge differences in abundance of these pollinators, with much more in the agroforestry than in the arable only system. So there's the benefits of having the trees, and then the knock-on benefits in terms of promoting insects, beneficial insects, and so on. So that's probably enough from me.
Fantastic. No, I think we can keep going. What about soil health benefits? Has there been any work done on that within the alley cropping, or?
Yeah, I mean, not so much. We haven't. We've done some work looking at earthworms, and that has a benefit. But it's really complicated and an area that needs a lot more research. I think in terms of soil. So that's an area for future development.
Yeah, I think one thing a lot of people I've seen ask around agroforestry systems is around cultivations in there and what happens with the tree roots and things. Helen, have you got anything to comment on that?
Well, certainly, I think Stephen Briggs, in his presentation this morning, slightly referred to this. But if you've got your trees in an alley cropping system where you're cultivating either side, that you'll do a natural sort of pruning of the roots, and it forces the tree roots to go much deeper down than it would be if that tree was growing in a normal forestry situation. So it doesn't, I mean, obviously you have to be slightly careful, but it just makes them change as their rooting system, and I think it makes them go down further, and in theory will bring up more of the nutrients from further below.
Yeah. And what's out there in terms of support for people that are looking to develop an agroforestry system?
Well, in England, there's very little because DEFRA didn't adopt the agroforestry options from Common Agricultural Policy. They did in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to a degree, but they were quite limited, and sadly the uptake's been quite small. So the Woodland Trust has a small scheme. We get funding from a corporate partner, a hotel chain, and that has enabled us to provide free advice and trees and guards for farmers interested in trialling fairly small scale agroforestry. So since 2013 we've had funding for just over 100,000 trees, and we've developed about 70 different agroforestry projects, everything from upland, hedges and shelter belts to alley cropping and everything in between throughout the UK. And we also do have some other more sort of general hedge and sort of small copse packages that we can offer advice and subsidised trees for. But this is a big problem, and it's something that we and lots of others are actively in discussions with DEFRA to make sure that future policy does support this area of work.
Yeah, and so I guess one of the benefits is obviously looking at multifunctionality, looking at multiple incomes from your agroforestry system. One thing I'm personally quite interested in is nut trees, but wonder if I've got my head in the clouds. What is the potential for nuts in agroforestry systems in the UK, and what we're going to do about squirrels?
Well, we just eat them.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we don't really have any good examples. I think some have been planted maybe through your schemes, haven't they? And it seems an obvious way to go. And I don't know. I don't know anything about nut production, but other than you've got cob nuts in Kent. And it seems to make sense, but I don't know if anyone out there knows. Is anyone involved in nut production? There we go.
There we go.
The Agroforestry Research Trust down in Dartington, they have I think they've got 10 acres of nut tree trials, and some sweet chestnut are doing really well because they're looking at that as a future flower alternative to make nut flowers. And yeah, it's eating the squirrels, but also sweet chestnuts are really, like, they're not so susceptible to squirrels, but also you can graze underneath them really nicely as well. So
fantastic.
Right, yeah. I mean, Martin Crawford down there's been doing great stuff, but he's been going for quite a while now, and it's like, why isn't anyone else kind of?
And I think he's just teamed up. There was an example, I think it was in the Silver Pasture one before, with Marina O'Connell at Huxham's Cross and a goat farmer working together on one as well. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's nuts or fruit though.
I think one of the problems as well is there's not the understanding or the supply chain for the processing of the products and the marketing of them, and I think that's, for farmers, if you're switching to starting to grow and market trees, it's identifying that there is a market and understanding your market for that tree product, which is something very different to what you probably have been doing. And I think there's a lack of that sort of small scale market processing opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess harvesting as well, if you're looking at kind of more diverse systems. It'd be interesting what's happening in the rest of Europe around that. I don't know if you're aware of anything, but yeah, obviously we're looking at, there's more demand for plant-based proteins. The time feels right to be looking at these kind of markets.
Yeah, I mean, just anecdotally, quite a few of the farmers who've approached us with wanting support are saying, diets are changing. We want to think ahead and think, well, maybe I should be getting into something as weird and wonderful as nut production while I'm currently a sheep and arable farmer. But they are starting to think about it.
Yeah. And someone else put their hand up about nuts. Might come to you.
When you don't get, when you're not getting your walnuts from California, you're often getting from Moldova, and the Moldovan walnuts coming over in pretty large quantities are all grown in windbreaks. They're huge windbreaks across the steppe. And this is not small scale, this is serious planting, thousands of miles of things, the width of this tent. And they planted walnuts very wisely in the 1950s, and we can enjoy them now.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've seen pictures actually in China as well that Stephen Briggs has shown. I can't remember what tree species it was, but it seems like there's... was it a nut tree? Okay, no. Anyway, great idea, and we should be looking at doing more of that.
Plant nuts. We can study.
Yeah, fantastic. Have we got any more questions out there? Yeah.
Thank you. A couple of questions about establishment, and then one about a sort of more practical agri-system problem that we've got. The first one is, I saw in Stephen Briggs's talk the use of mechanical augers to plant trees, which was a bit surprising given we normally plant trees with a spade. So I was wondering if there was a particular reason for that in an agroforestry system. The second one is deer. We're in Essex, and that's a major problem for any tree that we put in. And the third one is under drainage. So we're on a very heavily under drained system, quite heavy clay in some places. So I just wanted the panel's view on that, really.
Stephen here? No. Well, he had 4,500 trees to plant, and I guess that was his decision to try and get it done quite quickly. But bear in mind, he's on really light soil. You're right. I mean, he could have done it by hand. Easy bugger. I don't know. Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, most of the schemes that we've supported at Agroforestry have been hand planted, but obviously much larger scale woodland then will be done. So I think, it's a personal decision. I don't think there's cost often comes into it. A lot of the farmers have ended up doing it with some staff and volunteers help because the schemes have been small enough. You're talking 2,000 or 3,000 trees in most cases. So, yeah.
What were the questions? Deer. Well, I guess it depends on the value of your trees. So Helen Browning at Eastbrook, she's got really high value trees that they planted, and they deer fence the whole section. But that's a huge investment, obviously. It's an ongoing issue, and there's no easy answer, I guess. I mean, protection.
Yeah, I mean, protection is obviously one option, but certainly as the Woodland Trust, we're really struggling with this because it's becoming such a serious problem in most parts of the country, and it is, we would say it's probably the biggest challenge to creating more woodland or any level of tree canopy. So we're involved in the Deer Initiative. So there isn't we've got out of balance. There's too many deer for the food chain and the way that our environment is operating. So I think culling them has to be part of the mix. Otherwise, it's looking at the design of your system and working out whether the protection is affordable within what you're planning.
Just an interesting observation we planted on Elm Farm a silvopastoral system using willow and alder, just common alder, and we didn't protect. We made a decision not to protect, and the willow got munched instantly. The alder really didn't get touched. It's obviously not very tasty, and I don't know if there's other species out there which might also fit there, and maybe you're using them to, we're just identifying which species would work in terms of less palatable or something like that. I don't know. Holly
They
as well.
could act as nursery trees to protect your valuable.
Just talking about palatability of different species, our colleagues at the Organic Research Centre are doing some work looking at tree fodder or potential for tree fodder and different species for fodder. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what they're up to?
Yeah, I mean, so tree fodder has been used traditionally. Willow in particular is really high value in terms of tree fodder. And it's something that farmers are also interested in again now, not stepping back but looking forward really to see how it fit in a modern system. And it's nutritionally comparable with some forages depending on the species. Things like mulberry is really high in protein, but maybe the biggest potential is kind of to balance deficiency in sward in terms of micronutrients. So some species are high in copper, willow's high in zinc. And so it could be used almost to buffer any shortfalls in the grass, really. So,
wow. Yeah. What about medicinal properties? Are there any species that have kind of aromatic or?
Yeah, they do. I mean, the tannins in tree fodder play a role in terms of reducing intestinal worms burden. So that's a plus. And things like willow has got salicylic acid in it, which is precursor to aspirin. So there's some potential there for self-medication. We don't really understand enough about how animals choose these, and that's a whole new area of research would be great to get into.
Yeah, brilliant. We've got any more questions out there?
I'm interested in the commercial aspects of agroforestry. So I wonder if are there any examples in the UK where the forestry revenue outstrips the agricultural revenue? You mentioned some examples of where there's 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 trees. I'm a commercial apple grower. I know that 3,000 trees isn't going to translate to that many tons of apples. You probably in that context, it's 50 tons if that. So, unless there's a lot of value being added by turning that into juice, selling that on your doorstep as fruit isn't going to add a vast amount of income to an arable farm of the scale we were hearing about. So are there examples where the forestry products, be it fruit, be it wood, are on a par with conventional agricultural products, or does it tend to make a relatively minor financial contribution, notwithstanding the other benefits obviously in an agroforestry setup?
I think it depends on your starting point. So we tend to think of a starting point as the agricultural system, and you're adding trees to address some issues there. But of course you can start from the woodland or the tree perspective, and you're adding in animals perhaps for grazing in orchards, or you're adding in an agricultural element to perhaps provide regular income whilst your trees are maturing. I was in Northern Ireland last week and was at a trial they set up there, which I thought was really interesting. It turned my head around anyway, because what they've started with is cherry as their main tree species. Around, basically you've got one cherry tree, and then planted round it were 9, I think ash trees, to force the cherry up to get a good cherry. Their plan now, after I think 10 years, is to take all the ash out, so they've got their cherry going well, and actually graze underneath. So their starting point was very much a plantation that they're now going into a silvopastoral system to get that kind of the sheep benefiting from that interaction. I thought that was really interesting actually. But yeah, so there are examples. I think we tend to be starting from agriculture because that's where our research is. But you're right. There's opportunities coming from the other direction as well.
Yeah, I mean, only so again anecdotally, most of the farmers there've been farmers who are coming to us, but there's no foresters coming to us to want to do this, and the farmers are mainly coming to either address sort of the sort of environmental issues or to add a value-added product. So again, it's the sort of apple juice rather than bulk apples. But we have now had 1 or 2 farmers who we've helped to plant who are planting for timber. So they're still farmers and it's alley cropping, but they're in for the long haul and they're looking for timber. And there are some farmers who have got woodland, and it is there for a commercial woodland activity, but are now looking at how you then introduce perhaps livestock into using that and sort of putting them more on a 50-50 basis. But no, I think it's the Woodland Trust are just the same. We've been talking to farmers constantly, rather than looking at it from the forestry perspective. So I think that's an area of work we need to think more about.
Great, thank you. We've got another question down the front here, Lisa.
Hi, my question was about hedges actually, because I was just listening to the talk earlier, thinking, well, actually, we've got quite small fields already. We've got these hedges. Have you got anything to say about how we could optimally manage our hedges for our arable crops in terms of wildlife and things like that, and also how I might be able to enhance my hedges for commercial reasons?
I was about to ask the same question, so that's good.
I mean, obviously there's been a lot of work looking at how to manage hedges for wildlife, but what we're interested in on our farm, Elm Farm, is that's a cost involved in terms of you have to manage your hedge to reduce the impact on the neighbouring field, but can we somehow offset that cost by producing a product from the hedge? And the one thing that we started with was bioenergy. These hedges grow well on our farm. Can we harvest them by coppicing, produce wood chip, which would then go into a wood chip boiler to be used on the farm, and then getting the regrowth back, managing it on maybe a 15-year rotation, coppicing rotation. There's been a lot of scepticism from the bioenergy industry saying you can't produce wood chip of fuel grade from these structures, these hedge structures. What we found with our trials is that we can, so that's not a problem. The next way is how do you actually harvest them mechanically that stacks up financially, and we trial different scales of machinery, right from kind of manual chainsaw, which is obviously quite slow but cheap, and you can do it yourself, through to kind of farm scale tree shears, so quite small tree shears that you can put on an excavator and use, right up to kind of forestry scale, which is more expensive obviously to get in, but works a lot quicker. And actually the farm scale tree shears stacked up financially in terms of the speed it worked, the daily rate and so on, and then the income from the wood chip. Now obviously every hedge is different and it's so hard to kind of scale up, and these were actually hazel hedges which had been coppiced previously like 28 years ago or something, so others which are slower growing might not be so profitable, and also we wouldn't really recommend going out and doing that on every hedge on your farm, because coppicing, you end up with a different structure to a really scrubby hedge which has a different value for wildlife, so it's kind of managing coppicing short stretches annually, and across the farm to create this mosaic habitat, which theoretically would then also have a positive effect on biodiversity. So you've got kind of more open hedges that you might get the annual plants coming into, and then as they develop, that community will also change. One thing to bear in mind is when you've got things like dormice which need that kind of continuous habitat, you can't really go blazing in there with tree shears or something and kind of break their habitat. So all of those things need to be taken into consideration. But definitely I think there are great opportunities to using our hedges, not just the hedges but the existing trees in our landscape. They're important parts of a landscape, but there are also opportunities there as well. Other projects, I mean, we're looking at using the wood chip as to improve soil fertility, so either through composting or using directly as ramial chip wood, just a thin layer at a certain stage in your rotation. And then obviously tree fodder could be used if you use, if you kind of fencing, using electric fencing to allow certain access to the hedges of livestock. That's also a product in a way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so when I asked if you're doing agroforestry, I bet a lot of you actually are. Agroforestry being trees on farms, I bet you've got hedges. There's lots of opportunities and ways of looking at this. I think we've got time for one more question. We've got anyone out there? Any burning questions?
Just to say, actually, we've got a booklet on productive hedges over there, I think. And if there's none left, come and find me, and we've got a stack somewhere. Steve?
Events, have you got any events? Oh, sorry, events that some of the people asking the questions can go and find out a bit more.
Yeah. Did I plant that question with you? Yes, I have, and I've got a flyer here. So we've got 2 events coming up. One is next week. It's a mature ash silvopastoral system. I think it's 30 years old now, and that's over in Buckinghamshire. There's a few places left. I've got flyers, so come and grab me. So that was a bit short notice, I know, but if you fancy a trip up north, we've got another workshop on the 15th of August, which is a Thursday, and that's looking at vegetable agroforestry systems. It's on Gibbside, which I think is a National Trust estate, and they planted agroforestry last year before, so it's in the early stage, and they've got kind of do's and the don'ts to share with us, so you'll be very welcome at those events.
One last question. Oh, yep, we've got one there. There we go.
Should say they're free as well. Free lunch.
I'm an interloper here. I'm coming from the bond market and looking at green finance being applicable right across this arena. Next week sees the launch of the Green Finance Institute, with Helen Cheshire putting in £1 million and the City of London in £6 million in order to establish natural capital accounting for agricultural systems like this that are preventing carbon emissions. And so the whole theme of natural capital accounting for landscapes, which is underpinning environmental land management schemes, is absolutely crucially important. In terms of the way you're thinking about the value of these interconnected schemes, are you using natural capital economics?
Personally, no, but there is, in terms of agroforestry, the work is being done. It's not my area. Not sure.
No, I mean, and I think, well, there's the handbook that is coming out, so the group of interested party organisations led by the Soil Association who secured the funding, we've pulled together a handbook on agroforestry which starts to look at some of the economic data out there, but it's an area that needs a lot more work on it. From a Woodland Trust perspective, we are starting to think about, in relation to the Climate Change Committee targets of increasing tree canopy cover from 13 to 17%, exactly what we want to see, how that can be achieved. And we feel that trees outside of woods in the rural and an urban landscape play an important role in that. And although there's a lot of understanding on an area of woodland in terms of its carbon mitigation, there is no real accepted levels of what a shelter belt of a certain dimension can deliver or alley cropping can deliver. So I think that's an area of work that needs some urgent work on it. The Woodland Trust is starting to think how we might contribute to that and how we might commission some work on that, but we would be welcome to share ideas and opportunities to take that area forward.
I know as well. I don't know if we've got anyone here from the Natural Flood Management. Yep, hello, maybe we can get a mic over to her. They're doing some work looking at the role of agroforestry and flood management, and I'll let her tell you about that quickly.
Hi, I'm Joanna Clark from the University of Reading. Thank you for letting me have a couple of minutes here. So yes, there's 2 projects. So one, I handed out some flyers and then I ran out on the agroforestry project we have. This is part of the NERC greenhouse gas removal programme. So this is very much looking at the potential for agroforestry to help capture carbon. And what we're interested in this survey is understanding what the economic and policy barriers that are stopping people from doing this. So if anyone would like to take part in that survey, please come and find me, and we'll go to the natural flood management stand, and there's some postcards where you can get a link to the survey online. And as part of this project, it's called Calibre, we're also trying to quantify the potential for agroforestry at a national scale to sequester carbon. So like you're saying, not about woodlands. This won't answer all the questions. It's just a start, if you like, with that sort of survey. And then in relation to that, so the Natural Flood Management Research Programme, we're very much interested in how different types of land management could be used to reduce flooding. And again, this is something that, for instance, insurance companies are interested in as well. And we're interested in getting to understand your knowledge on this topic. So those of you who have, land and farm, you'll know when it rains where the water's sinking in and where it's running off. And we'd really like to hear from you about what management is associated with good infiltration on what particular soil types. So I have got some postcards for that here as well. And also agroforestry can play a part of that as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think we have to wrap up here. Thank you so much, guys. That was fascinating. I'm sure if you've got any more burning questions, you can come and ask them afterwards. Do stay with us. We've got more sessions this afternoon looking at integrating sheep into the rotation. Do sign up to, it's all free, the Agricology newsletter. You'll get updates every month.